Welcome to episode 199 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show the public who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent John Iannarelli, who served in the FBI for 20 years. During his FBI career, he was the FBI's national spokesperson, on the FBI Cyber Division executive staff, an FBI SWAT team member, and the Assistant Special Agent in Charge, ASAC, of the FBI's Phoenix Division, where he oversaw all criminal, cyber, and counterintelligence investigations throughout Arizona. In this episode, John Iannarelli reviews safety tips on how parents can keep teens safe online and on social media. He talks about predators, scams, identity theft, cyberbullying, and sextortion. A frequent on-air law enforcement contributor for national TV news programs, John Iannarelli is a highly sought-after speaker, and he's also the co-author of WTF, Why Teens Fail and What to Fix, a parent's guide to protecting their children from internet predators and other dangers. You can learn more about John Iannarelli on his website, fbijohn.com. Now, John and I recorded this interview early in March, just before we all started sheltering in place due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But now that being online is one of our kids' only social outlets, this interview is even more relevant, considering all the extra time teens are now spending on their devices. Now, I hope everyone is keeping safe, and for those of you who are healthcare providers, in law enforcement, or other essential workers, I want to thank you. I also want to thank each and every listener. Working on this podcast gives me purpose. I feel like I'm providing a much-needed distraction from the health and economic crisis around us. I also want to thank you for picking up a copy of FBI Word Search Puzzles, Fun for Armchair Detectives. As you know, when it first launched, it was the #1 new release for word search and word game books. And coincidentally, it is currently the #1 release in teen and young adult puzzle games. The next episode I release will be my 200th episode. To celebrate, during the month of May, I'll be giving away an FBI Silhouette Target apron, an FBI mouse pad, FBI challenge coins, podcast stickers and buttons, and print digital and audiobook copies of all of my books. I will provide more details about this 200th episode giveaway in my May Reader Team email. If you're a member of my Reader Team and you haven't been getting my emails in your inbox, please email me at jerrywilliamsauthor@gmail.com and we'll figure out what we need to do to fix that. This podcast is all about true crime. But if you're also interested in crime fiction, I want to invite you to join my Reader Team, where once a month, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my Reader Team, you get access to my FBI Reading Resource, which is a colorful list of more than 50 books about the FBI, books written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. Nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You can join on my website or use the link in the description of this episode in your podcast app. I want to thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, John Iannarelli. Hey, John, how are you?
I'm great. Great to be here today.
Did I pronounce your name right?
Perfect.
Okay, great. I'm really excited to talk to you today because it has been a while since I talked about kids and the internet. It's going to be really interesting and informative for us to touch on that topic again. But before we get started, could you just give us an understanding of your cyber expertise and how you started working cyber cases in the FBI?
Sure can. Let me just give you a little brief background so you know and your listeners know where I'm coming from. I had been a police officer for a couple of years and wanted to join the FBI. So went to law school, got my law degree nights and practiced for a bit before joining the FBI. And early on in my FBI career, I was thrust into the cyber program. I had been very involved in computers beforehand. And remember, we're talking the mid to early 90s when AOL was just coming out. So the fact that I knew how to turn a computer on made me one of the more experienced people in the room, and hence for the cyber division. But worked cyber my entire career in one facet or another, and hopefully have a lot of great information to share with you today.
Well, very cool. I looked over your website, which I'll make sure to link in the show notes for this episode. But I looked over your website and I could have talked to you about so many things connected to cyber, especially when it comes to terrorism. But I really like the idea of talking about kids today because I haven't really touched on that recently. So do you mind if we just concentrate in that one area?
No, I can't think of an area that would be more important for your listeners to be able to keep their kids safe, kids they know, people in the community, etc. So it's all good information to share.
All right. So why don't we talk about some of the cyber cases that you've been involved in when it comes to kids?
So for years and years in the FBI, I was involved in what was referred to as the Innocent Images program. By way of background, the FBI, much like the TV show To Catch a Predator, will get involved in going online looking for those who are pursuing children for nefarious purposes. And by the way this all started, the FBI had a kidnapping case out of Baltimore where a young child had gone missing. And in the course of looking for this child and running down all the leads that come with an investigation, they found a person who lived down the block that was a registered sex offender of young children. Now, this individual had nothing to do with the disappearance of the child. The investigation showed that he was not involved, but they discovered that he was downloading child pornography, contacting children online, pretending to be a child. And it opened up a whole world the FBI needed to look at of how many predators are out there. Initially, we're thinking maybe there's a handful, couple of dozen, and then it quickly evolved into that there were thousands, tens of thousands, and maybe even hundreds of thousands of people out there interested in victimizing children. It became a big focus for the FBI, worked by all 56 field offices with connections around the world as well to pursue these people, prevent them from hurting kids, and bringing them to justice. Now, as part of that, I had a number of cases, as did my agents when I went on and became a supervisor. I ran a squad doing this out of headquarters. And the typical case involves somebody who's online, downloading pictures that are on the internet and looking at these pictures. Then it morphed into, as technology evolved, now they have video with audio and they're watching movies of kids being sexually abused. And eventually, the average predator gets bored with just looking at the pictures. Then they want to start luring children to meet with them. We refer to these guys as travelers, where they'll contact a child, perhaps pretend to be another child and say, hey, let's meet at the local Burger King in your town. Well, then the person will travel that location to make contact with the child. The FBI comes in by trying to prevent it from happening. And frequently, what we'll do is we'll get online and pretend to be children ourselves. So that way, with the predators making contact with us, lo and behold, they show up. It's actually an FBI agent waiting for them.
And that is kind of like To Catch a Predator that you talked about, which was a TV show. Was it on NBC?
Right, with Chris Hansen, who I met with just a couple of weeks ago on another case, but it's still a significant problem. You know, when you look at in this country, the number of sexual predators we deal with, we have 650,000 registered sexual offenders. Now, they're not all pursuing children, but they're dangerous nevertheless. Let's put those numbers in perspective. That's 650,000 registered predators. That doesn't include the ones that got out of jail and took off and didn't bother to register with the local authorities. It doesn't count the ones that we just don't have the resources to prosecute. And it doesn't include the ones we haven't found yet. There are a lot of folks out there. And when you and I were kids, our parents told us, don't talk to strangers. Be careful with that guy and hanging out in the park. Well, now in today's 21st century, the internet is the park and everyone's a stranger. You don't know who you're meeting on the internet. That's why it's so important that parents counsel their children when they're young and continue to teach them as they grow older the boundaries on the internet. Because when you cross those boundaries, you put yourself at risk.
And I guess when we're talking about the internet nowadays, we're also talking about just our phones and social media.
Absolutely. You're walking around with a computer in your purse, and guys have it on belt clips, wearing it around, etc. The fact is, it's not the home computer that kids and teens are using. They're using their mobile devices, iPads, phones, etc. They're communicating through social media on everything, and that's the playground for the predator. Now, the vast majority of the people on these social media sites and on the internet are good people. But as you know, as a professional from law enforcement, it's that fractional percentage, that element out there. Those are the ones we have to be careful about, and they're not readily apparent who they are. That's why everybody has to be treated carefully. Anybody you meet, they are not a friend unless you've met this person in person and know more about them. Otherwise, on the internet, you can tell somebody you are whoever you want to pretend to be, and that's exactly what the predators do.
My children are all adults now, but, I now have grandchildren, so, this is going to be very important to hear. But what are some of the dangers that affect kids who are on their devices? Who are these predators and how are they getting to them?
There's more than just a predator, but let's focus on the predator for now. And that when you go on a social media site or you're communicating in some of the various apps that are for kids today, whether it's ask.com or Ask Me or Tinder or anything like that, you want to assume the person you're talking with is age appropriate, meaning they pretend to be somebody that is your age. You want to believe that they're your age. But I'm meeting predators in the course of my career who are 20, 30, 40 years older than the person that they're pretending to be. That's the danger. And what they do is they backstop themselves very well, meaning they'll have a school name that they can use, indicating where they allegedly go to school. They'll have done enough research to be familiar with sports teams in that school or that area. They'll know of local locations, giving you just enough information so you think, okay, this person is legit. But just as dangerous, and when I talk about the boundaries. So, for example, if I put on a social media site that I go to such and such high school and I'm a junior there, well, chances are I can go to the school's website if I'm a predator. I can look up all sorts of information at school. I can probably find pictures and photographs of sports teams and other activities with the students' names. So now I can track right to where you are, your full name, where you go to school, the hours you're at school. And then given that information, it's very easy for me to find out where you live. You're going to reside within the school's district. I have your surname, so now I can look at public records to find who owns a home with that same last name in that school district. These are the things that predators do to try to locate kids. Another thing to think about, kids are posting all sorts of stuff on social media in real time. They'll go to a party, they'll have a picture up there of the party going on. Well, every time you take a picture with your mobile device, you're embedding data that shows exactly where you're located at the moment that picture was taken. So I've had many cases of predators that are pursuing various kids, whether young or teens. Pictures are posted. Now they know exactly where that kid is. They're not in school. They're not at their parents' house. They're out on their own. And that predator can try to make contact with the child at that time. So you've got to be careful of the information you're putting out there online purposefully, but also careful of the information you're putting out there inadvertently as well.
And how serious is this? Because we all, you can go to any event, and no matter how exciting the event is, everybody is still on their phones. All the kids are on their phones, even the adults are on their phones. It seems almost impossible to warn people about their activity because everybody's doing it. So what does law enforcement do in that situation?
Well, it's an uphill battle. What we're finding is there's simple procedures and things you can do to keep yourself safe. For example, just turn off your geolocation on your phone in your settings. By doing that, any pictures you take are not going to automatically have that metadata embedded so that nobody can see the address. Now, if you're in a public place, you're at Disneyland, you're at a concert or whatever, you're still putting that information out in real time. It's dangerous on many levels, including people know like you're not at home. If you're putting out you're on a family vacation, well, not only do you have to worry about these predators, but you've just told the entire world that commits burglaries that, hey, your house is empty. No one's there. These are the things that I always caution people. Don't post information that you're going to be going away on a vacation to such and such place. Don't telegraph information that criminals can use to try to hurt you.
Now, when it comes to online predators, what's the situation? Are these strangers, or are these people that have met the kids in some way in real life? Right now, we're just talking about predators, and I know there's other safety tips that you have for kids online. But for the predators, how are they deciding who they're going to target?
It varies. So a lot of times the kids that can be assaulted or pursued by predators are kids that, in fact, know the person who is assaulting them. But there is the strangers as well who befriend the kids. And what they will do is they will get online in these chat rooms and, again, pretend to impersonate to be younger people, and they'll befriend the various kids so that way the predator can try to make contact with them in real life. A lot of times, even before they make contact, they'll encourage the kids. So, for example, sexting is a common practice amongst teens where they think nothing of taking a photograph of themselves with no clothes on or scantily clad and sending it to somebody else. Well, the predators will encourage them to do that. They'll send back pictures that they say are of them, but actually are just other pictures they've pulled off the internet that other kids that have probably been victimized and by other predators and have been put out there so that they can try to continue to entice these kids and lure them into all sorts of things. Many times, once kids send such pictures, the predators will even start blackmailing, saying who they really are, and that if they don't continue sending pictures, they're going to post those pictures for everyone to see, send it to their friends and school. And then we've seen cases where they even go and say, well, I'm tired of just getting pictures from you. If you don't get your friends to send me pictures, I'm going to release all this information and these photos I have of you as well. So it becomes a game of blackmail, of trying to keep the predator from hurting you further than he already has.
And who are these predators? Are they men and women? Are they located in the same area as the kids that they're targeting? Who are they?
So typically, your average predator tends to be white males, although I've arrested all races and I've arrested women as well, because there are women that sexually abuse children, both boys and girls. They tend to have some assets. They're not like we're always worried about, the street person hanging out in a park, whatever. But the reality is these are guys and gals who have computer equipment, who can get online and make contact. They may be in your very own community. They may be very close to you because the internet and social media gives us the ability to focus on areas as opposed to worldwide. So if I don't want to travel anywhere, like certain predators will, I may say, just show me kids to talk to on this chat room within this geographical area. Otherwise, though, they can open it up and be anywhere. And that's where we get these travelers. I've had guys jump in their car and drive through the night, get on planes, pack up the motorhome and drive cross country. They come in all forms and all sources. We just have to be careful because regardless of where they live, they can be a threat.
And do kids still go on chat rooms? I mean, with social media now, I would think that that's not as dangerous as before. But then again, I think of things like Reddit. And I guess Reddit is social media, but it's also, has a chat ability. Are there any particular platforms and sites that kids frequent now where this type of activity is especially dangerous?
The places it's most dangerous is what is referred to colloquially as the hookup apps. A lot of kids are dating through apps like Tinder and places like that. And again, you're meeting complete strangers based essentially on nothing more than physical attributes. But the predator knows that. And so he or she is not using their picture. They're pretending to be somebody else. And they're putting that out there for the purposes of meeting children. Now, again, the vast majority of people on these apps, whether you approve of the apps or not, are not necessarily a threat. But anytime you're going to put yourself in a position where you're meeting a stranger, you don't know anything about this person other than what they've told you online, you're putting yourself at risk. You wouldn't go to an airport and ask somebody, hey, can you hold on to my bank account information? Well, essentially, you're meeting a stranger online and trusting them with your life because you don't know anything about them. You got to take precautions. The reality is the world's changed. This is what people do today. This is how we meet people. This is how the younger generation meets people. So if you're going to do it, you got to meet in a public place. You got to meet with people that are around. Bring a friend, etc. Have communications beforehand. Talk on the phone prior to the first time you meet. And even talking on the phone is no guarantee. I've had cases involving predators that will use a device you can buy over the internet, and you can make your voice sound like anything you want. In the FBI, we've used this device. If an agent is pretending to be a teen girl, it'll change the voice of the male agent who's talking to the predators. So when it comes out over the phone, it sounds like a teenage girl speaking. Predators are using the exact same tools to go after kids.
That's fascinating. I don't think I've heard of that before. So what are some of the things that a predator would use to lure a victim? When it's a dating or a hookup situation, there's nothing more that you need to do than to say, let's meet in person. But if you have like maybe a teenage girl, who's at home meeting somebody on one of these social apps, and next thing you know, the parents realize the child is gone and has gone to meet this person. What kind of steps does law enforcement take? And if you can think of a particular case that you worked, a closed case now that you worked in the FBI, I'd love to kind of hear about what kind of procedures, not giving away secrets, of course, but what kind of procedures the FBI would take in order to locate, a child or a teen in this situation that's been lured away by an online predator like that?
Great question. So let me walk you through a fairly famous FBI case, and being very upfront about it, this was not my case, although I had a peripheral connection to it. It was worked by other agents, but it's become one of the seminal cases that the FBI frequently talks about. So this is the story of Casey Woody, a young lady, 14 years old, who was a victim of a predator because she gave out information only because she did not realize who she was communicating with. Casey had been on the internet. She had gone into chat rooms. She had spoken with a lot of people. And there was a night that her parents were out for the evening. It was a school night, but she was a 14-year-old teen, so could certainly be home alone. She's online chatting, and she was chatting with a friend of hers who told us afterwards, when interviewed by the FBI, that for whatever reason, she just stopped chatting. She didn't say goodbye or anything like that. And let me preface by saying this case is a couple of years old where kids were not using their mobile devices as much as computers, but everything I'm telling you now is easily translatable to the mobile device. So anyway, she's at home, she's chatting, texting back and forth, and then doesn't say goodbye, good night, or anything, just stops in mid-conversation. Parents came home about an hour later and didn't really notice anything amiss until they went to check. They assumed her daughter went to bed. They find out she's not in her bedroom. She's not home. They can't find her. They make some calls to friends. It's very odd because she's a good student. It's a school night. They call the police. The police come over. Police do a great job. They recognize a problem when they see one, and they're like, this is more serious than just somebody walking out of the house. They call the FBI, and the FBI gets involved right away. I will mention that, in the U.S., we get about 50,000 runaways a year and of teens and young children. That could be anything from a few minutes to gone and missing. So it's not uncommon to have children leave the home, and cops see this all the time. And that's why I point out these cops did a great job, because they recognize, yeah, there's something amiss here. And I'll get into that in a second.
Not just another runaway.
Right, exactly. So, and when the FBI get there, they see the same things the cops seen. So it's December night. It's cold outside, but she left the house without any jacket at all. Under her bed, they found a pair of broken glasses, which indicate that there was some sort of struggle. And they wind up, subsequently, when the FBI gets involved, they check her computer. And one thing your listeners should know is you can delete anything you want off your computer, but that doesn't mean it's gone. Forensics in the FBI and others have the ability to pull up all sorts of previously typed messages and deleted messages, etc. They found that she was, in fact, communicating with a subject who had been basically was pursuing her, an older man who purporting to be a similar age child himself, but in fact, of course, he was not really. And that's how, again, she got herself into trouble, because she accepted on face value this guy was who he said he was, but of course he wasn't. So anyway, as the investigation goes on, the police and the FBI are looking to try to locate her and the subject. By the next day, they had the subject's name off the computer. And I will tell you, this is where I ran into this guy about 6 months earlier. I was a San Diego-based agent at the time, and I received a report of somebody at a car dealership who was looking at pictures of child pornography in the workplace. And as I had mentioned earlier in this conversation, this is what happens with these guys. They look at pictures of child pornography, but then they get bored and they want to take it to the next level. So the subject of this case, a David Fagan, while pretending to be a 14-year-old boy, he was a 47-year-old white male. He sold cars at the dealership. Undoubtedly, he was the one looking at the child pornography. Problem is, it was a computer that was used by many employees at the dealership. So there was no way to prosecute, because the defense would be, it's not me doing it. Somebody else must be downloading these pictures. Although he had a bit of a history and he was the logical subject in the case. Likewise, I'll point out this guy had been married for almost 20 years. He had a couple of kids of his own. So maybe not the person you think is the subject that might be a child predator. But again, they come in all shapes and forms, so you can't predict. So anyway, moving on with the case, the FBI looks into this. They find out that the young lady has been looking and communicating with this guy for some time. Casey Woody actually had written a note that we found in the bedroom, the FBI found, and it was in her handwriting. It was really something kind of a kid's thing, but it was her doodling on being in love with this guy. Why? Because she thought she was talking to a 14-year-old boy, not a 47-year-old male. The FBI eventually gets a hold of the cell phone records, sees that she's been talking to him on the phone. They also subpoenaed a subject's internet service provider records. And they find that he, even though he lived in a different state, he lived in California, he had been logging on to the internet locally from a local area of where Casey had resided. And so obviously got to find out where this guy is. Local law enforcement, along with the FBI, starts checking all the motels and hotels in the area. They find his vehicle parked in front of a Motel 6, check with the manager. He's been checked in about 5 days before. And so they're able to make entry to the hotel room, even without a warrant. As you know, exigent circumstances want to protect the life of a child. So they make entry and they don't find anyone there. What they do find in the motel room is that he had checked in, he had a suitcase. With his suitcase, he also brought a laptop that he was using to get online. He also had latex gloves with him, which were an indicator of he was going to try to commit some sort of crime and not leave fingerprints behind. So when we think about the totality of this so far, here's a guy who travels to where Casey lived, checks into a hotel, gets online, obviously chatting with her. And you know, kids can have multiple conversations at the same time while they're chatting. He finds out, remember, her parents are out for the night. He was very patient and he waited for the right moment. And we believe what he did was he went to the house, knocked on the door, rang the bell. She answered, and that's when she was abducted. By later in the afternoon, he had wound up using his credit card, and we see that he had rented a minivan, which explains why his vehicle is still in the front of the hotel that he was staying at. And likewise, he rented a storage locker that was big enough to drive a van into. So the police and the FBI go out to the storage locker. They find the locker. There's no lock in the locker, so they're able to open the door. And as they do at that moment, there was a gunshot. When they went inside, they found the subject who had taken his own life, probably assuming that he had been caught by the police, because these guys know they're giving up everything. In the beginning of all this interview that we're doing, I had talked about how they're middle class, they have money, they have assets. That's why the typical criminal who does these crimes know their life is going to change dramatically. They're going to give up everything they had and go to prison probably for the rest of their lives. So that's why he likely made the decision to kill himself, take his own life. Unfortunately, the van was there as well, and in the back of the van was Casey's body. The sad part of this is you can see that the FBI, the local law enforcement, put a great case together, worked well, worked extremely fast, and yet was not fast enough to rescue this poor young lady. The lesson I want to impart to your listeners is that law enforcement is not going to protect you in these circumstances. Law enforcement responds when something's already happened. The best way to not be injured as a victim is to not allow yourself ever to become a victim. You know, we didn't know as much then as we know now, and that's why we go out and we tell this story about what happened to Casey, so that hopefully kids can be smart about the information they're giving out, who they're trusting. The internet, the boyfriend and girlfriend, they're not really who you may think they are. You've got to be very careful. Catfishing has become a term kids are accustomed with because anybody can get on the internet and pretend to be somebody they're not. It's happened to famous people. It's happened to everyday people. Unfortunately, it happened to Casey. And that's why we have to be careful of who we're trusting and who we're giving information to. And that's the moral of this story, is being careful of what you put out there on the internet, because you don't know who you may be speaking with.
Of course, none of us want anything like that to happen to, any kid that we know. So what about some tips? What can parents and loved ones say to our kids who we know are using these dating apps, who we know are giving up their entire life on social media? Other than saying, don't do it, which we know is not going to work, what are some good tips? What are some things that we could say to them for them to be more cautious?
There's a number of tips. And so what I tell parents is think of it in terms of age appropriate. Now, for young children who are not running out of the house on their own and all, they are still attractive to predators. Certain predators pursue certain ages. So we want our kids to be technologically aware. It's the way the world is. We want them to have familiarity with these devices. I always encourage have them use their devices in a common area of the home. It used to be there was a time where set the computer up in the family room. Now we're talking iPads and phones, even for young children. Restrict usage to a common area. That's way, if they're contacted by anyone, you have an idea of what they're doing online and you can see who they're communicating with and contacting. Same thing with video games too, because video games now are not being played by oneself or playing with another friend in a room. They're being played on the internet with absolute strangers. Predators know that and they get on these video games as well. And while they're playing the game, they're communicating and sharing information. Make sure as a parent, especially with your young children, you're privy to what's going on. Another practical advice is there is a bunch of monitoring software out there where you can put on your child's device and it could be as intrusive or non-intrusive as you want it to be and see what websites they're going to, who they're talking to. If you really want to see all the communications, you can do that, although that would be a lot of work for the average parent. But even the most basic of settings will give you an idea of the kind of things your kids are doing. Now, when I go out and speak publicly about this, I inevitably will have a parent in the room saying, what about privacy issues? Don't you trust your children? And the answer is, of course I don't. I mean, the reality is I know what it's like to be a kid. I love my children, but I also know they're going to stretch the boundaries every chance they get. So
you remember your own childhood, I guess, your own teenage years.
Absolutely. And having had teenagers, I know what those years were like again. So what I did was I put monitoring software that was age appropriate. And I wasn't looking at every detail of everything. But, if they were going to a site that I was unfamiliar with, I would do a Google search and I'd find out what that site was about. I'd want to make sure that they weren't putting themselves at risk. And then finally, there is no substitute for open and honest communication. Talking to your kids, letting them know what your expectations are. The beauty is if you have multiple kids with multiple ages, making the older kids, giving them an idea of responsibility for the younger ones and the idea of protecting the younger ones, they themselves will become more comfortable and familiar with some of the dangers that are out there. Everything we've talked about is the small fraction of what's out there on the internet. The internet's a great place. It has revolutionized everything. We no longer ask that question of, gee, I wonder how I would find out about this, because all the answers are there for us. But with that comes some danger and comes some responsibility. All we want to do is make sure the people on the internet understand that.
Well, that makes sense. So we've taken a good portion of this interview to talk about online predators, but I guess there are other things that kids need to be careful about when they're online, such as maybe identity theft and things like that. So could you talk about those safety measures also when it comes to kids and being online?
Sure. Great point you're bringing up, because the reality is identity theft scams, all of that affect kids just like they affect the adults. I've often asked a question when I speak of, well, why would they want to steal my child's identity? The beauty of stealing a child's identity is if I steal your identity as an adult and I'm using it for a criminal purpose, you're going to find out pretty quick. If I steal your child's identity, chances are you're not going to find out till they turn 18 and enter college, try to get some credit, things like that. So it's not uncommon to steal the identity and use it online with falsifying a date of birth, etc. But it all ties back to the child. I had a case in Arizona. We investigated a young lady who had her identity stolen when she was 9. When she showed up at college at 18, it turns out she had $1 million something in debt because loans had been taken out in her name as co-signer. And she also had a criminal record because somebody was using her identity who had been arrested a few times. So it's a good idea for not only age appropriate kids, but parents as well. Take a look at the identity of your children. You can do, for example, just like we have various services that'll monitor your identity, make sure they're monitoring your kid's identity. Most of these services offer you the service and your children for absolutely free. So make sure you add their names. The other piece of advice I give parents is if you have children, lock down their credit reports. You know, I could steal your identity all day long, but if my credit report's locked, well, then nobody can take out any loans or debt in your name. And all you have to do is contact the credit bureaus free of charge and tell them you want your credit report locked. They'll do that. It's a good idea at that time. Make a credit inquiry and you're entitled to a free credit report. See if there's any sort of history for your child. If there is, that means somebody's been doing something in their name. But by locking that credit report, you're keeping yourself safe. But if you make that inquiry, if there was no pre-existing credit report, the very fact you made the inquiry created a credit report. Now you got to make sure you lock it down so nobody can use it.
Oh, that's a good tip. Really good tip. What other things should kids worry about online?
All the scams that are out there, the phishing scams, any type of email scam, any emails you receive that purport for you to do something and click on a link, all that stuff applies to kids the same way it applies to adults. So, for example, kid gets an email with a link or a text message with a link saying, hey, click on this and win a Starbucks gift card. Well, anything like that is really nothing more than a scam to download malware onto your computer. Now I'm going to have all your passcodes to everything you do, including any banking you might do. If you're using any sort of device and then you send a text message, an email, etc., to another family member, mom and dad or siblings, and they open it up, or there's a link that's transmitted through that, they're going to have malware on their computers. So I might be able to send you some malware. You click on a link. Next thing you know, I have access to your mom and dad's bank accounts. So you've got to be very careful in what we refer to as cyber hygiene. Never click on a link from somebody you don't know. When you receive a link from a entity purporting to be legitimate, don't click on the link anyway. You go right to that website of that entity and you link your way through the website. So when I get an email from my bank, for example, with a link, I don't click on it. I go to my bank's website and then I get to where they want me to go. Because the reality is most legitimate businesses today know not to send links because there's so much malware out there. They will tell you, go to our website and log on. And that's what you want to do to keep yourself and your family safe.
You know, I was thinking also that they probably are victims of shopping scams too, where people are trying to sell them the latest video game or the latest, sports shoe or something like that. And they end up paying for something that's a counterfeit or paying for something that they never received. Does that happen to teens? Is that something they need to be worried about too?
It happens to everybody. You've got to be so careful when you're getting contacted for anything online. The reality is legitimate businesses, Nike and others, they're not going to be sending you any sort of thing via email or especially text message to your phone which, by the way, is referred to as smishing. It's basically your SMS text phishing. Nike and other businesses, they're doing just fine without having to try to send you individual messages to get you to buy their products. You're going to go buy them anyway. Anytime you get something like that, it's going to be a scam. And you have to be wary that if it looks too good, it absolutely is. If you're getting a special offer and you think it's something you want to do, again, go to the website. That special offer will be available on the website if it's real. And if it's not on the website, then you know you just uncovered another phishing scam. They want you to make the purchase. Not only are you not going to get what you ordered, now they have your name, your address, your phone number, your date of birth, your social security number probably, all of which they can use to sell your identity to someone else. But they've got your credit card number, and now they're going to charge up a storm until you discover the error and decide to cancel the card.
All right, so we've talked about predators and we've talked about scams and identity theft, all of which is, something that the FBI could investigate, could be a part of. But there's also a few other things that happen on the internet. I'm not sure how it relates to the FBI. One of the things I think adults need to be concerned about is cyberbullying. Is that something that during your FBI career you had any involvement with?
Absolutely. So cyberbullying has taken on a life of its own. It is a crime in all 50 states. There are actually some federal regulations now as involving the use of an internet. But the problem really with the cyberbullying is, when you and I were kids, if somebody was a victim of bullying, it basically happened during school hours. Now with the internet, it's happening 24/7, and that's why it's such a problem. There's no safe time anymore where a victim can get away from the bully. What I will tell you is the people who are doing the bullying are facing felony charges because of the significance. We've had a number of teens throughout the United States take their own lives, sadly, because they could not escape the nonstop bullying. The good news is there are things that can be done. Law enforcement can get involved, but what we have found is that in 84% of the cases, if somebody is told about the bullying and says something, the bullying will stop. As an FBI agent, I got calls from parents that were concerned their childs were being cyberbullied. It took nothing more than a phone call from me to the parents of the person who was doing the bullying or having a chat with the child, and it got shut down immediately. Now that law enforcement can get involved in these things, it's a game changer and hopefully will stop it from happening. It's really important if a person's a victim, they need to tell somebody. If somebody's aware somebody's a victim, they need to tell somebody. And if anyone has the guts to speak, the statistics show the bullying will stop.
All right, that's very interesting. I can see now, offices around the country being inundated by parents, wanting to complain that somebody's bothering their kids. So, how severe does it need to be? What are the levels in which the FBI would be able? Not, I'm sure they're always willing to get involved, but because of manpower issues, what's the level that we would be able to get involved?
For law enforcement to get involved and actually be able to take some action, there's got to be some sort of threat involved to the victim. However, the good news is that it's not just the law enforcement alone. Now schools have a responsibility. Even if the bullying is not taking place during school hours or on school property, if the victim belongs to the school or the predator or person doing the bullying belongs to the school, either or, schools now have a legal responsibility to take some action. And so there are a lot of resources for parents to get involved. I received many a call where we weren't able to help under the law, but I was able to provide them the right direction to try to solve their own problem, and much of which was very successful. There was the occasional time I'd go out and talk to somebody and we'd give them a fair warning and they didn't stop. Well, that's when law enforcement got involved. And that also sends a message to other would-be persons who bully that, hey, so-and-so actually got arrested for the threats that he was making online. And it put other persons on notice. That's why, again, I encourage, if there's any bullying happening, we need to be proactive and say something about it immediately.
Well, at the beginning of this interview, I had mentioned that there's so many areas when it comes to cyber crimes and things that happen on the internet that you could talk about. And one of the reasons, I think I forgot to mention that one of the reasons that we looked at this particular area is because you were a co-author in a book that was called WTF, Why Teens Fail and What to Fix. So I take it that you have a couple of chapters in there about cybercrime when it comes to kids?
That's right. I also focus a lot on the identity theft. We've talked about a lot of things today, but one last tip I want to make sure I give when it comes to all that, especially for children. Most teens, kids, they're not using a credit card. They're using a debit card, and that their families will usually put money on the card. They may have a bank account with their own money, and they're using their debit card. The advice I give is never use your debit card to make a purchase. The reason being is when I use a credit card, it's the bank's money. If my card is compromised, if it's skimmed, if somebody steals the information, if there's a device on the machine that you swipe that steals my information, which is very common as well, it falls into the wrong hands, etc., it's the bank's money. The bank is not going to pay the bill. They'll argue it out with the creditor and they'll get it resolved. When it's a debit card, it's your money. The money's going to come out of your account and go wherever it's been scammed. And now you're left talking to the bank and saying, hey, I was ripped off. Would you mind putting money back in my account? The bank's going to ask you, well, was it your fault? Where did you use your card, etc.? You don't want to be in a position that you're arguing with a bank to give you money. Better to use cash when you can. When you have to make a purchase electronically or otherwise, try not to use your debit card. Use a credit card. For my kids, I gave them a credit card in my name for such circumstances. It was very limited. It had a spend limit on it, etc., and they needed my approval. But I knew the dangers of them using a debit card and didn't want to see them lose the money they have.
Yeah, now that makes a lot of sense. So this has really been fascinating, and you've been able to take your cyber career in the FBI and transition it to a career now outside the FBI, one of those good post-FBI jobs. But before we talk about what you're doing now, can we step back, way back? And you mentioned it a little bit about when you joined the FBI, but you didn't really tell us why you joined the FBI.
Well, I got a great story for that. So I'm in junior high, 9th grade career day, and an FBI agent comes in and talks to my class about the FBI, and I'm sold. That's it. That's all I want to do for the rest of my life. So literally from that day forward, ask anybody, and they will tell you I was annoying to the point that I wanted to be an FBI agent. And my education, my job pursuits, I decided I was going to become a police officer to get some law enforcement background. At the time, the FBI was hiring accountants and attorneys primarily. So I decided I was going to go to law school, and I wound up practicing for a little bit while I was waiting to get into the FBI because, as you know, it can be very competitive. And even if you're hired, doesn't mean you're going to an academy class right away. But the great part of this story is from the day I decided I was going to be an FBI agent in that 9th grade career class to the time I was actually in the academy was 18 years later. 18 years later, I'm at the FBI Academy. It's after hours, and I decided to go up to our boardroom, which for your listeners, that's a little place to hang out where you can have a drink, get a slice of pizza, etc. And one night I take a walk up to the boardroom after class, and they're having a retirement party for the agent that spoke to my junior high school class 18 years earlier. And so I had not seen the man since that time. I went up and introduced myself, and I said, I'm here because of you. And it was a great experience. And the fact that it came full circle and that he had inspired me, was leaving the Bureau, and I was actually at the Academy getting ready to start my Bureau career.
Wow. And were you from the Virginia, Washington area?
No, I grew up in the New Jersey area. The agent I had met was a New York City agent. And then in the course of my life, I wound up becoming a police officer in California, in San Diego. I was looking for departments that were hiring, big city departments, and that was one of them. And I was fortunate enough to get on with them. And wound up going to law school in San Diego nights while I was a cop, and practiced law in California before joining the FBI. And in the spirit of the FBI, being a San Diego City street cop and spoke Spanish well, my first office, the FBI sent me to the Canadian border.
That makes sense.
How many times have we seen that happen? And so I went and worked in Flint, Michigan for my first tour. And I like to think by the time my Spanish skills had sufficiently diminished, they then transferred me to my second office back to San Diego. And then from there, I had a good time going to different offices and doing some tours at headquarters before finally retiring out of Scottsdale for the FBI Phoenix division.
All right. So you retired, and what have you been doing since?
Well, since I retired from the FBI, I'm having almost as much fun as I had when I was an FBI agent, because I have some areas of expertise. And the Bureau refers to you as a subject matter expert, their title, not mine. I am now a speaker in the areas of cybersecurity, terrorism, and active shooter. So I speak to corporate America, various conferences, etc. I do some consulting work, and when I'm not busy doing that, I write books and have a number of them out.
We're at the time now where I give my guests the last word. So what would you like to say?
You know, there's a lot of dangers out there on the internet, but let's not lose perspective. While there's dangers throughout the world, the vast majority of people are great people, and there's a lot of great opportunities on the internet and elsewhere. All I want is not paranoia, but just be aware. You want to be aware of your surroundings, whether you're out in public or you're online, to keep yourself safe so that you can continue to do the things you want to do.
And that's the end of the interview. At jerrywilliams.com, you'll find a photo of John Iannarelli. There are lots of links to fantastic articles about how to keep teens and preteens safe on the internet, including a link to the FBI's new campaign, Stop Sextortion, an awareness campaign featuring safety tips and videos. And there's also a link to the FBI's Cyber Safety for Young Americans, a step-by-step guide for teachers and students in 3rd to 8th grade. And of course, there's a link to the book that John co-authored, WTF, Why Teens Fail, What to Fix, where he, along with other law enforcement folks, teachers, administrators, and counselors, provide valuable insights to parents about how to help your teens avoid the serious pitfalls of adolescence. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. If they're not sure how to listen to a podcast, have them read the post on my website, How to Listen to a Podcast. And subscribe to FBI Retired Case File Review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. I would love it if you also check out my books. My nonfiction, FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a manual for armchair detectives, which goes through 20 cliches and misconceptions about the FBI in books, TV, and movies. And there's also my Philadelphia FBI Corruption Squad crime series. All of my books are available wherever books are sold. Please consider leaving a review. Reviews help readers find good books. Thank you for listening to the very end, and I hope you come back again for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.